Hey everybody. Hey everybody, Kevin Gain here with Team Losi Racing. We're here for episode 8 of In Touch with TLR. This week we're going to do a little 10 scale talk. We're going to build a two-wheel drive diff here and kind of go over the break-in process, go over some of the diff stuff, some of the diff settings, and kind of a tighter diff versus a looser diff and what those mean on the track and off the, so forth. So first thing I want to do is get into building a two-wheel drive diff here. It's pretty simple. We've done quite a few different videos in the past with building a two-wheel drive diff. So this is more for the new users. Some of the advanced users, already know all this stuff and it might not really apply to you. But this is going to be more geared toward the new user, the new racer, and so forth. So the first thing, I kind of got everything a little bit set up here, but the first thing that I like to do when I build a diff, I like to first, you want to make sure you're doing everything on a towel. I don't prefer a blue towel like you'd use for cleaning your tires, because the balls and different things can roll around really easily. I like to use a cloth. I find that it's easier because you're working with a lot of small objects and small parts. It's very easy to drop the parts, and the next thing you know, it's rolling off the table and you lost parts that you need, or they're rolling around in the dirt. So make sure whenever you're building a diff, use some sort of a cloth when you're doing it. So first thing I like to do is I like to get the silicone diff grease out. And you'll have your 14 balls in the bag here. I like to fill this up with some silicone diff grease in here first. I like to do it this way for a couple of reasons. One is I like to get that grease throughout all those balls in the bag here. I like to do this because it makes it a little easier for the kind of fresh guy that's not used to building diffs all the time. What this does is it gets the grease on those balls, so again they can't roll away. They're going to stick wherever they end up falling. So it's just another added precaution. You guys spend a lot of money on these diffs, and you go out there after buying them in the shop to go put your diff together, and the next thing you know, you have your diff that's rolling away and parts are rolling away. You can lubricate if you're confident in putting the balls into the gear and everything without lubricating them first, then you absolutely can do it that way too. It doesn't really do anything more for lubricating the balls any other way. I just like to do this, like I said, so you don't lose any of the balls out of the bag when you're trying to get this all put together. These parts are sneaky, and when they fall off the table, they fall into the dungeon, and they're always impossible to find. So that's what I like to do. The very, very first step, I like to do that. Then it just sits there till later. The other set of balls, you can put the black grease in here if you want, but these ones I like to do it after. It just makes it a little bit easier, and it's a little bit less messy. So the next step, you'll notice that when you get the outdrives out of the bag, they're coated with a kind of like a gun oil, like a thin oil. You want to make sure you get all that oil off, because any oil that you mix in with your silicone diff grease, it can affect the longevity of your diff. It'll make your diff slip. So it's very important not to get any other grease, no black grease, anything mixed in with the diff grease itself. So I take a little bit of our Magnum Force Dynamite motor spray. I'll just spray those off a little bit. You don't have to get crazy. Just a little bit takes off what you need to take off. Wipe them down. Make sure they're clean and dry, and everything's good to go. All the oil's gone, nice and clean, super dry, exactly the way they need to be. Now, I like to For me, I like to build the side with the screw first. It kind of feel like I get the hard part out of the way. So the screw always goes in the female side, which is the side without the nipple. That would be the male side. So nothing fancy here. You have your thrust washers in the bag. I always take those out. I try to keep everything in the bags until I need them. Even with a clean rag, it kind of gets tough to make sure you don't get any kind of speck of dirt, because as soon as you get one speck of dirt in there, it just kind of makes your diff feel dirty feeling. So I take the screw, take your thrust washer, stick it on the screw. Doesn't really matter what side it goes on. Both sides are machined and surfaced the way they need to be. Then you take your black grease. I take just a little bit of the black grease and apply it all the way around the ring. Just like this. Just like that. Now doing that allows the thrust balls to stick to it when you put them on, and you just take them one at a time, stick each thrust ball onto the diff. It might look difficult, but it's really easy. With that black grease on there, the balls stick right to it. I always do one at a time. I feel like every time I get brave and I want to stick two of the balls up at one time, it all falls apart on me. So make sure you continue to just do one at a time. It makes it a lot easier. Just one ball at a time here. And then when they're all on there, you should have 6 balls. Then you take the other half of your thrust washer. I don't like to add any more black grease than that, because too much black grease becomes a problem. The diff will get hot, the black grease will start kind of, I guess, melting, and it'll get into areas and parts of the diff that you don't want. So you don't necessarily need, more is not necessarily better. I'll stick the other thrust washer on just like this. And then very easily, before you put the screw through, I always like to stick the bearing here inside of the diff. It makes it easier, so you don't have to come back and try and do it after you have the screw on. Just like so, throw the bearing in there. And then, very simple, carefully, just take the diff out drive, throw the screw through the diff, get it into the hole. I'm doing this not looking at it, so it's a little tougher. And then I just grab the end of the screw, pull it all the way up so it sticks out. And then here's a little trick that I do to keep this in. I'm not sure how many people do this or realize it, but right now the screw can, you can push it in and out and it'll fall out. So I'll hold the screw like so, and I'll take the plastic retainer for the female side and stick it in the out drive. I'll take my 1.5 wrench and I'll literally just take that piece and slide it all the way down there. And now that piece holds the screw in. So now you don't have to fumble it around or worry about the screw pushing out and the ball losing the balls after you've gotten started. So now it's in there and it's all together. Everything's good to go. So now I will take my diff rings that are in my package here that have some of the diff grease on it itself. I'll take these out of the package, and I actually myself, I prefer to clean off the grease that already comes on the rings. I like it to do it because you just never know if there's any machining oil that got mixed in a little bit or whatnot. So I just put a couple of sprays on there on each side. And I will wipe those off on a clean rag, just like so. So there you go. They're all cleaned off. That way it assures to me 100% that the machining oil and everything was completely cleaned off before putting it together. Because like I said, if you mix those oils together at all, your diff's going to get crunchy really, really quick. So another thing that guys like to do that I don't like to do is they like to put the silicone diff grease around this ring right here. I prefer just to put it on, just like this. And what that does is, and the reason for this piece to be surfaced on here so perfectly is it's the last how would you want to say it? It's the last part that will save your diff. Because if your slipper fails you and it drives too much power to the diff itself and the diff wants to bark, by this ring being able to slide on the outdrive a little bit, it will give here instead of actually making the ball slip on the plate. So it's a last resort safety feature, and I find it to work very well for me, not to put any grease on there. When you put the silicone grease on there, the silicone grease wants to make the two parts grab, and it doesn't want them to slip. So that's why I do this, and I've had really good luck with it. My diffs last quite a long time. I've been really happy with this setup. So I suggest that you can put the silicone grease on there if you'd like. There are some people that I know that put some black grease on there. That one gets sketchy. I don't know if I recommend that one myself, because that black grease, as soon as it gets into the diff balls itself, your diff's gonna it's just gonna get crunchy because it's gonna slip when you don't know it, and you're gonna have a lot of problems. So black grease is bad. So I throw that on there like that, and then I let this just kind of sit here now, and we get to the diff gear here. And what I like to do to get things started, I like to take the bearing and stick it onto the outdrive, and I like to take the gear and I will stick the gear on here and push the bearing on. Makes it really easy to get that bearing in. Sometimes when you get it and you're trying to just put it in here like this yourself, it gets kind of angled wrong and it gets kind of hard to get in. So if you throw it onto the outdrive itself first, you can slide it right on really easy. And by that being on there now, it allows it just a lot easier process to put together once you have all the balls in the gear itself, and trying to get it on here, it makes it a lot easier. So now I just take the balls and I get them into the gear itself, which is pretty simple. I like to actually just take them all and get them all into the gear itself by just kind of squishing them out of the bag with all the grease in it. And doing this also traps all the balls into the gear so they can't get lost. And then I just take my 1.5 and I'll just start moving the balls around and slowly push them into all the holes. And once you get them all into the holes, you're good to go. So this will take a few minutes just to get them all maneuvered over. What's also nice, like I said, about putting the grease in early, you're also getting that diff grease right now into that diff ball grease into all these little holes, which is what it needs to do itself to lubricate everything. So this will take just a couple minutes, guys. Like I said, if you're very confident in yourself, and like I said, this video is a little bit more geared toward the new racer that's not 100% confident in building his ball diffs. So this is geared a little bit more towards them. So if you're confident, you don't necessarily have to put this grease in here. You can just throw the balls in there, let them bounce around. You can put them in on the holes really quickly and put it together. I just find that putting this grease in here for the new racer is a lot better than losing the balls. It just makes it kind of assures that you can find them. They're not going to run away from you like they like to do sometimes when you drop one. And if you drop one of the balls, you know what, you can't put it together. You're stuck. So you have to go in and buy a whole nother package because I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've ever found a diff ball that I've dropped on the ground. They seem to run away and hide from you. So as you can see, I got all the balls into the positions. They're all got some diff grease on there. So again, more diff grease is not necessarily better. You want to get a decent amount in there. I like to just lightly put another extra little coat on top of the balls. Like I said, more is not necessarily better. At a certain point of if you get too much diff grease, it's just going to come out. So it's not really going to do a whole lot. So you can see just a little bit of diff grease in there. You don't have to overdo it. And I like to start with the female side of the diff. All the balls are in there. Kind of blow it off, make sure none's in there. I'll drop this side down. You don't have to press it down. If you press it down, it's just going to shoot all the balls out the other side because the diff grease is going to push all the balls out. So you don't want to necessarily put it in and push all the balls out. If a couple of the balls kind of pop out like they are here just a little bit, just kind of give them a little push back down. And then again, just a little bit of diff grease. You don't have to overdo it. A little bit of diff grease there. And then it's real simple. Take the plate with the gear. And then you're just going to slide the two pieces together, just like that. Perfect. And then, like I said, it makes it nice having that piece in that holds the screw from the beginning. Then you're going to take your 2.0 wrench, stick it in there like that. I like to hold the diff up with it. Actually, I'll get to this part here, which I forgot. So you have the diff spring here. We suggest taking the spring, putting it between a pair of pliers like so, giving it a little bit of compress a couple of times, just like so. What that does is it takes and kind of sets the spring. So when you set your diff tension and you get to go out and run it the first time, your diff's not going to change real quick and drastically on you, and all of a sudden your diff bark. So it just kind of like sets the spring, make sure everything is going to kind of stay the same. Your diff will loosen up a little bit your first run, which we'll get into kind of setting your diff for the first run here in just a little bit. Let's get the rest of this back together. So then again, take your 2.0 wrench. I like to set it on there, hold it. You'll just drop your spring in. Bam. You have your diff nut. You're going to drop your diff nut in here, just like so. I like to take the 1.5 again. You'll just press the diff nut down until you hit the threads, and then you're just going to tighten it down. Now I felt the spring just barely touch right there. So you want to tighten this down for the first time. Never tighten it all the way down. I know that was something we used to do way back in the day. Basically, you tighten the spring all the way till you feel the spring bottom out, and then you'd back it off. I think like it was an eighth of a turn back in the day. That's something we don't do anymore. We don't recommend it anymore. We found a better way to do it, and it takes a lot less stress off of the diff itself by kind of over tightening it and then loosening it. What we found is kind of creeping up to the tension that you want, going a little bit past that tension to start with, and then when the diff slowly loosens up, it'll normally kind of be right where it needs to be, and you just either tighten it or loosen it just a little bit after your first maybe 3 runs on the track. So to start with, to put it in your car, I like to get it right to where you feel the screw right there. So you tighten it down right to where you feel the screw and the spring and everything kind of get to their tightness, and then you're not really into the spring yet. So now what I do then is I just do an 1/8 of a turn, just like that, and it's ready to go. So now everything's tight, nothing's actually loose. The diff itself is on the loosest side it can possibly be. And the reason why I do that is because you want to, so the diff basically works, and how everything is able to grab and hold the amount of power that we put out today is the balls have to make a slight groove into the plate. And the smoothest that you can make that slight groove in the plate, the better. It's just like anything. If you dig into it really hard with a lot of pressure, you're not going to get anything smooth. So you need to make sure we're going to work the diff in quarter turn at a time to make that groove nice and slow. And that groove basically gives a more surface area for the balls themselves, which allow them to grab and handle the power that we're putting into these cars today. So that's where I start. Basically screw it all the way down to where you feel the screw grab the spring, and you're at the part where you're going to start tightening down the spring, and then do 1/8 turn and you're set to go. Now you just basically put the ball diff into the car, and then I already have a car here ready to go to show you guys. But I like to always put the diff screw myself on the left side of the car. The reason being is there's more room to get to it with your diff tool here. And otherwise, if it's on this side, you have your spur gear. You have only basically one area, one spot to get the diff screw in. And if we're consistent as a brand and everybody puts their screw on the left side, if anybody ever needs help quickly, whether you had a problem on the track or whatnot, anybody locally at the track will know what side to go to quickly to get your diff tightened or loosened and back on the track before you start late. So I have a diff here that I put into a car. Well, it's my car. We did some corporate stuff that has my diff in it. I loosen my diff up. So here's what we do basically to break in the diff. I like to start with the same setting that I showed you with there. And what that's going to do is we have our diff oil, our diff grease itself is really good, but it's on the thick side. So if we were to just start going right now to get the tension, it would be a little off. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to heat up that diff oil or diff grease by just having it on the loosest setting possible. We're going to run it for a couple of minutes. I won't go through the whole time period of what I suggest, but I'll break it down and tell you what we're going to do. So let me get my car on here. And, so my transmitter is almost dead. So all you have to do is you take your 1.5 wrench and you are going to stick it into the outdrive just like that and set it on the table, and you're going to have your throttle trim on your radio. Just turn your throttle trim up until the car starts turning the diff over. So you can see on this side over here, the tire is rotating right now by the diff trim. And you basically just going to let it sit and run like that for maybe a minute on each side. Is what I suggest to get the diff oil kind of going, moving around. And then run it like that for a couple minutes on that side. And then you're going to take it out, you're going to put it in the other side. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to let the diff just sit there and run for a couple of minutes. Just like that. And then we'll stop here to show you, but that's what you're going to do at first. That's going to get the kind of diff grease kind of ready to go, kind of moving, and ready to get the diff broken in. So then what you're going to do is stick your diff wrench in on the side here, and you're going to sometimes you got to stand up. There you go. and you're going to just give it an eighth of a turn, and then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to turn your trim up. Makes it really easy to stick the wrench in, get your thing, your wrench there, and then you're going to want to let that go for maybe three minutes on that side, and then after you're done with the 3 minutes, you're going to change it to the other side of the diff, and you're going to do 3 minutes on this side. Just like that, 3 minutes, and then you're going to, once you do each side, you're going to tighten the diff just another, eighth of a turn, just a little bit. Do the same thing back and forth. You basically want to keep doing that until you get it to the tension that you want, and then once you're at the maximum tension, that you want to kind of do it again, maybe 2 times, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. The more you break your diff in on the bench, the longer your diff's gonna last. The better your diff's gonna your diff's gonna work. So what I suggest for your max tension when you hit the track the first time, so I say whatever you like your tension to be at, you want to be 5% more than what you like your diff to be at, and that's going to allow the diff to break in. And your diff is going to get loose. So when your diff gets a little looser during the middle of your run, it won't damage your diff. Your diff should get loose probably the first 2 runs, and it shouldn't get drastically loose. We're talking just a little bit, but sometimes if you set your diff perfectly and you like a loose diff already, when you hit the track and the diff loosens up just a little bit, the next thing you know, your diff barks on the track and your diff just became junk. So it's very important. The diff is such a critical thing. It's a lot of time invested in it to change it out and get it working right. So the better we treat it, the better it will be and the longer it'll last. So here, let me set the diff tension on this to kind of where I would say it should be for your first run. The stiffer, the tighter you can run it for your first run, the better. Unless you're at a big race or you're at a race that you really want to do well at, and you had to change your diff between say A1 and A2, you might have to chance it, and you might have to just realize that after the A2 and A3, the diff might not be any good because you had to set it where it needed to be and it got loose. So but here you can see, I don't know, this is one of the hardest things to show anybody in a video, but maybe I could put like a black grease mark on here for you guys, and you can see, but the mark is down right now, and it did a half a turn. About a half a turn is where I would say you should be at for your first run on the track, your first couple of runs. It is very important to check your diff when it's new after every single run, and it's not a bad idea to not run an entire battery pack out there on the track for your first battery. Maybe put 4 minutes in if you can, if you have that ability. Put 4 minutes in, come in, check your diff, make sure it's everything's good. Because as the 2 plates start wearing in and developing a groove, it takes tension off the diff. Same thing with the thrust. So you have the thrust that's making a groove, and you have the larger rings making a groove. So they will loosen up. It is completely normal for that to happen. But once you get it to, after your 3rd run on the track, 4th run on the track, your diff should stay really, really consistent at that point, and not get loose anymore. One more thing: if you're an experienced diff builder and you've been doing this for a long time, you don't have to follow this suggestion that I'm going to give. But if you're a new user, or you're a user that you're really not confident in your slipper and diff setups, the first thing that you should do if you're not experienced with it is when you go to set your slipper and you have your diff and everything kind of where you think that it should be, even though you feel like everything might be right, take your slipper and loosen it maybe one full turn before you check your diff, because if your diff is looser than it should be and your slipper is way tighter than it should be, you're going to bark your diff on the table regardless. It's a new diff. It doesn't have the ability to have all the grip that it possibly can because it hasn't worn in that groove yet. So it's got less surface on the balls, so it's going to slip. And when it slips, it's going to make that groove really chunky, call it. And the next thing, your diff's not going to be very good anymore. So I suggest, if you're a new user, to loosen the slipper up a little bit before you kind of check your diff on the table. We've all been at the races and we hear this barking noise and we're like, whoa, whoa, somebody just blew up their diff. So let's not let it be us. So that's my kind of suggestions on building the diff. Other than that, like I said, just make sure it's tight. The tighter the better when you go out. It's just going to make your diff last longer, and then slowly bring it into the diff setting that you like. If you like a diff on the loose side, you have to have the understanding that you're going to go through more diffs than necessarily than a guy that likes his diff on the tighter side. It's just common sense that, you know, a diff's going to bark. It's going to bark a little bit on the track if you like your diff really on the loose side. That's my suggestion on that, guys. Like I said, this was more geared toward the basics, the new users with diff stuff. Next week we're going to be in Illinois at the Horizon race. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided yet what we're going to talk about next week with these videos. It's probably going to be something 8 scale geared because we are going to be at an 8 scale race and we're going to be in Illinois. And I think next week's video we're going to do it live from our Champaign office. I haven't figured out the details with that yet. But yeah, that's what we're going to do next week. If you guys got any questions here with the diff building video, let me know. It's kind of a basic video, like I said. Hopefully this helped a lot of guys out. I'm going to go through the comments right now. We'll get into the questions that you guys might have. And take your time with it. You know, it's your diff is your most precious item when it comes to your two-wheel drive. And a good diff can make your car handle so much better on the track. A diff that gets, you know, really dry and crunchy, you notice a big difference as soon as you put a diff in. Your car just drives, and it's so much smoother through the corner. It has more grip, has more steering normally. There's just so many advantages to making sure your diff is always in good shape. You know, a lot of times if you feel like your car isn't working good, check your diff. Make sure your diff is right. So let's talk about diff tension for a few minutes. We have a little bit of a variety on our team with drivers. Dakota likes a really tight diff, and when I say tight, that's not even that doesn't even describe it very well. He likes his diff. He likes his diff almost like a straight axle, solid axle, and that's how he likes to drive it. And what that does for him is it allows the rear end to kind of float around, and he's very comfortable with being uncomfortable, if that makes any sense to you. So when he likes the car, when it comes into a corner, to break loose, float around the corner, and accelerate immediately out of the corner. And a really tight diff will do that. It's going to break loose. It's not going to want to rotate naturally. It's going to want to slide the rear end around. But when you grab the throttle, the diff in the car is going to want to accelerate in a very straight line and very quickly. If you like your diff on a loose side, you know, your car is going to rotate naturally through the corner. It can get a little looser coming out of the corner, meaning it can the rear end of the car will want to kind of stay in the corner a little bit longer, because when you pick up the throttle, the outside tire isn't going to drive as much as the inside tire because it's spinning. So the outside tire will want to keep the car in the corner by that process. I like a mediocre kind of in-between diff. Most people do. If you run a diff on the real light side, it can be very fast. You have to be very controlled on your finger with the trigger. but it will carry a lot of corner speed, and it can be very fast. Picture Formula One. Picture a loose diff as Formula One racing, and a really tight diff is Lucas Oil off-road racing. Swing the rear end around, accelerate, pull the car out of the corner, and Formula One, you know, you hit your marks, you let the car do the work, and you flow and you stay smooth and consistent. That's really the two differences in diff tensions. The best thing you can do is have a diff right in the middle where it'll do best of both worlds. So yeah, but I would say a tight diff is a half a turn. I would say a good medium diff is, you know, 3/4 of a turn, and I would say a loose diff is, you know, right around 1 turn, which is really on the loose side. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. So let's get into some questions, guys. I saw a bunch coming through while I was on the video here, so give me a minute here to kind of backtrack through, and we will chat about it. So like I said, yeah, next week, hopefully I'll see a lot of guys, a lot of you at the Horizon race next week in Illinois. I'm actually really excited. I've not been to the Horizon RC Fest before, but I hear it's something you don't want to miss. So, of course, service is not helping me out here too much. All right, guys, let's get into some questions here. I can't believe how... Yeah, Mike, diff video, or your diff is every part of your car, every part of the setup is critical as the next. You know what I mean? Camber link positions, I mean, everything, all parts make a huge difference. And the diff is really one of the biggest parts. I mean, it's what drives the car. So I would say, you know, it's one of the biggest things to make sure you're paying attention to. Whoops. All right, guys, so let's see what questions we got here. All right, I got it up. Took me a minute. So, Mike, I answered your question. Yeah, diffs are a huge part of the car. It makes a world of difference the way it drives. I mean, when you get to carpet racing and Astro racing, it's a whole nother ball game. That's where we're going to talk gear diffs. We're going to get to that in a few weeks. I was going to do that today, but I figured that it would be kind of too much to do both at the same time, and I thought we all couldn't absorb, you know, them both together. So I'm going to separate those. We're going to do a gear diff next. I will say that I got some information from Brian Kinwald. I was talking to him yesterday. I asked him some questions about gear diffs and what he was running, because he's running a gear diff at Hobby Action, which is a dirt track, which isn't normal. Normally we run a ball diff on anything that's dirt, but he's been running a gear diff down there. He's been really liking it. He's up to 500,000 weight in the diff oil, and he said anything outside of Hobby Action would probably be a higher diff oil. So before I do the diff video, I'm going to get with Kinwald, and maybe I'll actually have Kinwald on with me when we do the diff video, since, you know, he's been really, you know, kind of driving that, and he's been really using it and liking it on dirt. So we might do that. So definitely. I have always been told the screw on the ball diff should always go on the left side of the vehicle. Does this not matter anymore? John, it doesn't really matter truly what side the diff screw goes on. It more, at this day and age, it more really matters more of what's ease of use. So I always put the diff screw head on the left side of the car if you're looking from the back, which is right here, the diff screw on this side. And that's because on this side of the car, you have the spur gear and everything else, and this side here is just completely open. There's nothing on this side of the car at all to get in your way. And sometimes those diff tools are a little bit of a pain to get in there and get into the screw head really quickly, like you need it to sometimes. So it's just whatever is easiest for you to get it in and use it. That's the best I've had it explained to me. Really, I'm mostly oval. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. Yeah, Ray, that's a great idea. He mentions Cow RC makes a magnetic mat to put down. I tell you what, anything that works for you to eliminate losing parts while building your diff, I'm all for. I can't tell you how many times I've opened up the package of the balls, and all the balls, I get distracted, and all the balls rolled out of the bag. And the next thing you know, I'm like scattered around looking for the diff balls, and you can't find them. Luckily for me, I just grab more out of my bag, but that's not always an option for everybody else, and I respect that. And that's why I kind of built the diff the way that I did, to make it very user-friendly and make it so it's really hard to lose parts. And that's really the key. You guys spend a lot of money on these diffs when you go into the hobby shop, and the last thing you want to do is lose parts when you're trying to put it together. So So let's see. If you guys got any other questions for me, let me know. I thought there were some more questions in this, but it's not letting me get to them. Let me check up here for you guys. Seems to always be a struggle to get to these questions. So it looks like that's it on here. If you guys got any more questions for me, I'll kind of zoom through a little real quick, kind of, you know, what we talked about. But yeah, just make sure when you hit the track the first time, like I said, make sure your diff is on the tight side. The last thing you want to do is ruin your brand new diff the very first time you hit the track. Try to build a diff and get on the track for the first time when it's not important, whether it's practice, you know, or just a practice day. If you have a big race that you're going to, try to put a new diff in your car the practice day before the race starts, or if it's a week before or whatever. If you're planning on a race that's coming up, throw a diff in it. That way it's all broken in and ready to go before you get to the race, and that way it eliminates any problems and stuff at the race. That way you can get more track time done. But try to keep the black grease out of everything, so forth. It really helps. So we got a question here. Do you recommend reusing any diff parts if you find yourself last minute building a diff at the track, like rings? Jack, so yes, you can reuse some of the parts. It depends on how badly the diff was that you're taking out or you're rebuilding. You can, if it's last minute and you have no other options, you can reuse the screw, you can reuse the diff nut, you can reuse the outdrives, which actually I'll bring up. I always recommend using your outdrives. I know some guys will build diffs and they'll build multiple diffs and they'll take them to the track. But if you're at a big race, I don't recommend putting in a new diff with new outdrives between, you know, qualifiers or going into qualifying or going into main events at all. You want to make sure you use the same outdrives, and that's because the outdrives have wear on them and they've worn into your dog bone. And that pin and that wear on the outdrive makes a huge difference in the way your car handles. If you have a new diff with new outdrives in your car is going to get really soft feeling in the rear because it's going to have a lot less bone binding up in the outdrive, which is a big thing. So on 10 scale, it's not as critical as it is on 8 scale. New outdrives on an 8 scale is like an entirely new car. But still, it changes the way the car drives. So it's one thing I really highly recommend. Always rebuild your diff with the same outdrives on the car. Always make sure you put the diff back in the car the same direction that it came out as far as the outdrives. Now back to your question. You can reuse parts. You can, at the end of the day, you can do whatever you have to do to get by to make sure put it back together and get the diff going as best you can. Normally, what happens is the balls in the groove that was developed gets chunky. The groove becomes not smooth anymore. The balls get a little out of shape. You can flip the diff rings around. And you can put new balls in if you have to, and you can reuse the diff gear. You can definitely reuse the diff gear. You can definitely reuse the screw, the spring, and the nut. And these are all things like if it's a last minute and you have to fix something, whatever, to get back on the track. Absolutely, it'll definitely help. The thrust on the other side, the thrust side is where a lot of the damage gets done. They're very small. They're very small balls, and they're spinning, and they take a lot of the load in this, when you're turning and diffing out and all that. So the thrust is where you need to sometimes look to improve your diff. So yeah, reuse definitely. The balls I wouldn't. The rings you can flip around if you have to. You can absolutely reuse the gear if you need to. Make sure you clean it really, really well, though. Spray it out with motor spray. Really good. You have to get all out of the holes where the balls ride. I suggest using a Q-tip and sticking a Q-tip into each hole, making sure you get any dirt, any grit, or any black grease or whatever might be in there. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, resanding the rings is perfectly fine too. If it works for you and the diff is smooth, that's all that really matters. The diff is functioning correctly if everything is running smoothly. If it's really crunchy and it's really dry, that's where you have a problem. If you sand your rings and resand things, or if you have a way of processing it and you put new balls in and everything feels good and smooth, you're good to go. Absolutely. So. All right, guys. If you guys got any other questions for me, let me know. I hope this video helped. It's something that we've done. We've gone over these videos in the past, building diffs. But I wanted to make sure we get it updated and kind of, on the new platform that we're using here with the In Touch with TLR. So yeah. Well, guys, thank you very much. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. If you have any other questions, throw them in the comments. I go back and kind of answer questions throughout the rest of the week. The last thing I'll add is I hope I see some of you guys at the Horizon race next week. If you see me there, come by, say hi. Dakota will be there. We'll have a good group of guys locally in the Midwest attending. So come by, hang out, and if you don't race and you want to just come by to the Horizon Fest, come by. I understand it's amazing. They have some light shows at night. They have some like night racing or night flying, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys out there. Appreciate it, and thank you guys. See ya.